In this next video demonstration of Smoke 2015, I want to focus on one of the most exciting new features, which is the 3D tracker. We're also going to talk about keying and masking and compositing in Connect Effects. I've got a couple layers here in my timeline. The top clip is the live action green screen footage. Underneath that, I have a 3D render of the machine room that needs to be composited with the clip we just looked at. And I also have a Z depth pass coming out of the 3D application so we can create depth of field. I've already done some of the work as far as the compositing elements together, and they're created in a Connect Effects. So I have that as my bottom layer, so I'll select that and I'll step into Connect Effects. So as you can see, we have the Z pass we just mentioned. I also have my 3D render pass that I just talked about. And as I said, I've already done some of the work because I don't want to repeat things that we've already talked about in some of the earlier video presentations. For example, I have a depth of field tool where I've already created the Z depth blur based on my Z pass and my CG render pass. And a great workflow inside of Smoke in Connect Effects, at any time you can pre-process a group of nodes and then use that as you continue working. For example, if I right-click over this depth of field pass, I can choose Create CFX. We now create a new node that is all these nodes inside of it. And the benefit of it is I can right-click and choose Render. I can pre-render this, then as I'm working and processing later, I'm using the rendered intermediates that I would generate. I've already done so with this clip right here. That's what this is. And if I scrub through, you can see I get great playback and all the Z depth, the blurring is all done for me, and I don't have to process it later. It's already done. Then I took the live action footage and I placed it into an action node. So in the action tool, you can see I have the live action footage and I have the end result, the CFX of the depth of field, already as two different layers. So the first thing I need to do is start to pull the key for this. I'll hide my media library for right now, give us a little more room in our viewports. Now, as you know, in Connect Effects, we have an unbelievable set of tools that we can start to use to pull this key. For example, I can take a master keyer, I can get a garbage mask tool, and piece by piece, we can start to connect these together and pull the key and the mat that we would use as our alpha information for our layer with the green screen footage. But one of the great advantages of using Action is it has presets for keying and color corrections and so on. So for example, where you see the letter K for the layer of the green screen footage, if I double click on it, we step into what is called the modular keyer. I'll go to a 2-view layout and you can see what Smoke has done. It's given me a series of different tools it will recommend that I use to pull the mat, such as a master keyer, a 2D histogram, a matte edge, and a garbage mask. This is the default start mode. If I click on this button here that reads start mode, you can see all of the presets that are available to me inside of this keyer. One of the main things that had to be done here was creating a garbage mask and tracking it. And since we've already discussed garbage mask and 2D tracking in great lengths in the earlier videos, I want to load a master keyer setup with the garbage mask already done. So I'll choose the load button and then I'll select the setup that I want to load. Now if I select the garbage mask tool, you can see that I just created 2 garbage masks and used the 2D tracker to animate and track the mask. Now we need to start pulling the green screen. I'll select my master keyer once again and access its parameters. Some of the main issues we have as far as the key is the woman's hair, we want to maintain the softness of that, and she's moving so the edges are blurred. But let me first just click in the picker and start to sample the green. If we take a look at the mat, you can see we've got a lot of work still to do. Let's go back and take the second picker and I'll click down in this area. Looking at the mat again, you can see now I can dial between the 2 sample greens that I picked to find the best combination while maintaining the hair. Bringing my cursor into the viewport, holding a hotkey, I get different contextual sliders that will allow me to come in here and try to fine-tune the mat while maintaining the softness along the edge. I can also use different patches to correct areas that are giving me trouble. Remember, I'm not worried about the wall or the ground because the masks are going to take care of that. But this area right here in the corner is giving me some trouble. So with patch 1 selected, I can region select just that area and fine tune and correct that. Let me get another patch and start trying to correct some of the other areas we have over here. At any time, I can look at the end result to make sure I'm maintaining the softness along the edge that I want to. Now we can see that we have this edge issue going on. That's partially because of the motion blur that's happening as she's walking across the scene. Let's go back and look at our mat and try to fine tune this a little more. I could even go to a third patch if I wanted to and click and drag in the white area to remove any transparency that I have. Again, I'll look at the end result, and now we'll start going to some of our other tools. I'll select the Matte Edge tool, and a typical workflow would be turn on shrink. And while that does get rid of the edge that I have there, it's also killing the softness, and I'm losing a lot of my edge. Maybe I can leave shrink on and just bring a value of, say, 2, something very minor. Let's go back over to the master keyer for a second. Over here under the color parameters, we have a color trackball and we have our auto color suppression on. If I disable auto color suppression, you can see all the green spill that smoke is cleaning up automatically for me. I'll put that back on. Now if I take my Luma value and I start dragging to the left or the right, you can see we can control the blending along the edge. And even with this adjustment, I'm still getting some corruption or the white edge that I'd like to see gone. It's at this point that I realize I want to use another tool that will allow me to warp the image and correct this. And that tool is called a pixel spread tool. I'll take the pixel spread tool, drag it into my schematic, and quickly make some connections to it. The pixel spread tool, as I said, is a warping tool. It allows you to warp and manipulate the edge of your image based on the alpha. For demonstration purposes, let me go to the end result of this, and I'm also going to select my master keyer, and I'll bypass it just for right now. So with the pixel spread tool selected, you can look down and I've got a spread mode. It's either expand or it's contract. If I take the parallax amount and start to increase this, looking in the viewport as I toggle between expansion and contraction, you can see what we're doing. We're pushing the pixels past their own edge or contracting the pixels. So let me select my master keyer, I'll turn it back on, and let's again take a look at the end result with the pixel spread tool selected. If I set the value to 0 and I slowly start to increase the amount, you can see what we're doing. We're warping the image past the corruption of the matte to get rid of that edge, which also allows us to hold on to all the nice detail of her hair. So that's a great key. That worked really well. So let me return back to my action tool. So now we've got the woman composited into the scene and we keyed it out and masked it out and it looks great. But let's step back 1 second because remember what I told you. We've got a rendered pass of the machine room. And notice that the camera movement from the 3D render is identical to the camera movement that is in our live action green screen footage. How was the CG artist able to recreate that camera movement so perfect? Because he used the 3D tracker inside of Smoke 2015. And then you're able to export that camera and all the data, the point cloud, to your 3D artist who then imports it into 3ds Max or Maya. The camera in Smoke is the same camera that's in those other applications. So let me show you how that was done. Let's go back over to my tools. I'll take a new action tool and I'll create a new layer and I'll feed in our green screen footage into that layer. I'll step into this action tool and I'll remove that layer for right now, but I'll make sure my image is selected in my media list. Then I'll go to my tools and you'll see we have our analyzer mono, analyzer stereo. I'll take the analyzer mono and just drag it into the view. And then I'll go back to the schematic view once again. You'll see the image is imported with its own axes, but a new camera, the 3D camera, has been brought in, and a mono analyzer has been brought in. Remember, by default, we always have a camera in the action tool. When I add the analyzer, though, a new 3D camera has been added also. If I double click on my analyzer tool, we'll get all of our camera tracking tools below. We'll talk about all these options and parameters, but for right now, I'm just going to click the Analyze button and leave everything set to default. All right, while that's processing, moving left to right, we have the automatic tracker settings. We can control the size of the trackers, the number of the trackers. You have a constraint option that if you do have a matte input, you can use that matte to either constrain the camera solve within the matte or outside of the matte, or in this case, I left it to ignore matte. You also have camera settings and focal length and film back, all these different options to help you create the best camera solve you can. My camera solve is now done. I'll set this viewport to be what is called the working, and I can zoom back and I can orbit my view so you can see all the tracker boxes and the camera itself. I can set this view to be my Analyzer 3D. Now as I scrub through, you can see all the possible tracker markers you can convert to axes or locators. At this point, I want to fine-tune this a little bit. So if I go to the tab that reads Fine Tuning, I can start to control the quality. As I change the percentage, you'll see certain tracker boxes changing to red. This is indicating that the quality is below what this filtering is saying, and it will remove those. I can also adjust the short percentage, which means any tracker boxes that do not stay along enough frames will be deleted also. Once I've got these set as I want, I choose delete. You'll see a bunch of the tracker boxes are now removed, and I can update my camera solve with only these fine-tuned trackers. The solve is done, and now I've got the tracker boxes that I want. Now back in my schematic view, I can double click on my camera and tell Smoke to use the new 3D camera. Then you would select any number of trackers you want, and then you would convert those to axes or locators, which we're going to do in just a second. But let me explain how you can export your camera. You simply click on the export option where I can export the camera, I can export the point locators, the axes, and so on, even baked animation if I wanted to, that my 3D artists could then import into their program to use this camera with their 3D scene. So that's how this was done. But let me show you some other practical uses you have when working with the 3D tracker. Let's say we want to add some elements onto this desk that weren't there the day of the shoot. Now if I'm working with a 3D department, or I know how to use a 3D application, I can very easily model a bottle and then export it as an FBX file and import it into Smoke. But what if you don't? What if you don't have a 3D department and you don't know how to use a 3D application, but you want to model an object that you have, such as a water bottle? Well, I've got a solution for you. I want to introduce you to another great Autodesk product that allows you to model geometry, actual objects, from images, from photos that you take. And here's the best part, it's free. It's called 123D Catch. So let me jump very quickly to a browser, and I'm at 123dapp.com. This is where you can access all of these products and programs from Autodesk. One of them, as I said, is called 123D Catch. I'll click on it and we'll go to its website. So this is an application you can download or access through the cloud. You can run it on your iPhone, your iPad, but the concept is this. You take a whole series of photos, such as these shots of this bottle that was taken by one of my coworkers, Louis Marcoux. He's also one of our 3ds Max specialists. But then you upload all these images to 123D Catch. It actually creates geometry, the model, based on the images that you've uploaded to the cloud. Then you can use the tools in 123D Catch to refine your model and clean it up. And once you're ready, once you've got the object and the model done, you can export it and save it as a file, such as an OBJ file that can then be imported into 3ds Max, into Maya, and of course, Smoke. So I already have a 3D version of this bottle that was created by 123D Catch. And now I want to import it into Smoke and put it on the table. So let's go back over to Smoke and continue looking at the new 3D tracker. The first thing I want to point out is how flexible this tool is. It's extremely powerful, but it also allows you to really control the axes and locators that you want to use. So right here on the edge of the desk, let's say I want this to be an axis. So all I got to do is, with it selected, click Create Axis. And now a new axis is added into the schematic view. And obviously, if I had multiple trackers selected and clicked Create Axis, all those trackers would each be turned into an axis. I can select that axis now, and I can name it. So let's name this Table. Now as I scrub through, I'm looking at this light right here. Maybe I want to select this one. Let me select the Analyzer. I'll also select this tracker, and I'll choose Create Axis. Now another axis is created. Let's rename this one properly. We'll call this one Light. But then there's also another option you have, which is called Create Locators. And this works a little different than individual axes. For example, if I region select these trackers right here and I choose Create Locator, you'll notice they changed their color in my viewport, but now I get one object that's called a point locator. The concept of a locator is we can use it as a centering point or as an individual point to lock objects to. So now let's go and import some 3D geometry. As I said, I've got a bottle that was created from 123D Catch. So I go to the action bin, I choose import, I'll select the water bottle that was created and choose load. Now we don't see it in the scene yet because its position during import is based on the original default camera. If I jump to our top view, you can see there it is. Let's go back to the schematic view. But if I take this axis that I created and I connect it to the bottle, now you'll see the bottle is brought into this camera's view. And as I scrub through, you can see there's my giant bottle that's on top of the desk now, following the camera movement perfectly. Just to emphasize that this is a 3D object, let me go and switch my view to be wireframe. And as I rotate this, you can see it is 3D geometry, once again, that was created automatically for me in 123D Catch. I'll set this back to being solid, and now with the geometry selected, I can now scale it down to the size that I want it to be, and as I start to scrub my playback, you can see my water bottle is positioned perfectly to the camera's movement. Now let's add some lights into the scene to light the bottle. So I'm going to add a new light into the scene. I'll take my axis that I named light and I'll connect it to this. It's now brought into the scene. And I'll use this light as my main light. So I'm just going to drag it way over here and position it up near the camera. And I'll quickly name that light. That's my main light. Now I'll go back over to my tools once again and add another light. And I'll also connect the axis to that light. And then I'm going to name this light lamp. So now the two lights are working together, and I want to control what each light is affecting. So let me zoom in on my schematic over here, and I'll switch my tool to be the light link tool. Then I'll drag off my lamp light, and I'll tell it I want you to affect only my geometry. You'll notice the scene gets darker because now this light is only affecting that bottle. I'll hold a hotkey, and I'll click off my main light, and I'll drop it on the geometry also. Now this light is affecting the background, the footage, but not the bottle. Go back to my select tool, and if I select my lamp light, I can now control the intensity, and as I move it around, you can see how it's lighting that bottle in the scene. So I can recreate the lighting as it should be. And we scrub through, the lights are going to move perfectly with the camera, the bottle moves perfectly with the camera. Now let's go back and talk about this locator that I created. I region selected a whole bunch of trackers back here and created this one-point locator. Let's imagine I want to put some 3D text into the scene. So I'll drag the 3D text tool into the scene and I'll connect my locator to the text. Now I double click on my text to access its parameters. Let's come in here and change what it reads, Smoke 2015. I'll change the size. Let's change the font, get something a little bolder. And let's give it some depth. There we go. And I'll also zoom in a little bit to really show you the control we have over our text. I want to come to the profile, and I'm going to give it a nice beveled edge here. So I can just manipulate this a little bit, something like that. I can add more control points and bevel the back edge of it. Taking this even further, let's go to my material tab, and I'm going to select the material that's applied to the bottle, and then I'll go to my tools, and I'm just going to take a reflection map and add that onto the bottle. Now I can go to the reflection map parameters. I can repeat this. We can scale this down. So we create kind of a stylized look in there. Maybe put a little softness to this, like so. There we go. Now if I select my text and I start to rotate it, you can see we've got this really cool reflection. Okay, let's get back to what we were originally talking about, which is the locator. So now with my text selected, I've got all these locators over here, right? If I hold the shift key and I start to move my text around, it's going to snap to each one of those individual locators. So I can use them as an individual 3D positioning tool. Or, let me undo that. With the locator selected, I can tell its axis behavior to be a center. Now the text will be centered to all of the different locators. So this is what I was talking about, the flexibility. Obviously this is a really powerful 3D tracker built directly in Smoke. It's not a plugin. It's not something that you have to add. It's automatically out of the box of Smoke 2015. Then you can see how creating individual axes from your trackers gives you so much control over what you're going to use your 3D tracker for. And the locator workflow adds a whole nother level of power you have with the 3D tracker. So this is just a quick example of how the 3D tracker can be used either by sending your data, your camera, your point cloud, and all the trackers to your 3D application, and then they can import that into their program and recreate the camera move you've got right here in Smoke. Or you can use the axes and the locators in the scene to position 3D objects, 3D text, and incorporate different elements in your 3D scene. So that's the 3D tracker in Smoke 2015.